There we go. Okay, I'm Casey Vance. I'm the Executive Director at Ames History Museum, and I want to welcome you to the first lecture in our 2021 online lecture series. Thanks for being here tonight. And I'm going to go ahead and put a poll up on the screen right now that will help us know how many people are watching with you on your screen if you have additional people. So that just gives us a better idea of how many people are actually here. So thanks for participating in that. And this program is being recorded. So if you need to leave early or if you lose connection, no worries. The recording will be emailed to you after the program. If you have questions for the speaker during the lecture, I encourage you to use the Q&A box or the chat feature, and I'll be monitoring those questions throughout the lecture, and we'll have some time to answer them at the end of the program. And finally, I want to recognize our annual lecture series partner, Ames Public Library. We're so happy to have this great partnership, even in the virtual realm. And I'll go ahead now and pass it over to Megan Klein Hewitt from the library.
Thank you, Casey. We are always glad to be able to partner for this series. The Ames History Museum is a wonderful partner, so we're glad to be able to be here in the virtual world as well as the real world when we would typically be in our building. I'm Megan Klein Hewitt. I'm the Adult Services Manager at Ames Public Library. And I'd just like to remind you all that the library's mission is to connect you to the world of ideas through diverse and inclusive resources and programs. In our ever-changing world, Ames Public Library is always happy to be able to continue to connect our community to information. Over the last year, we've added free access to the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal online, in addition to the other streaming and downloading services we've always offered. We also continue to offer online programming. This, as well as our ever-popular Genealogy Plus series, presented in partnership with the Story County Genealogical Society. Next month, we'll feature Brian Reinhardt, a Civil War genealogy expert, who will share resources on finding ancestors who may have served in the Civil War. So that program will take place on Wednesday, February 17th at 10 a.m. And you can find recordings of our past Genealogy Plus programs on the Ames Public Library's YouTube channel. I'm also excited to share that we'll be transitioning from curbside services back to lobby services on February 1st. So next Monday, you'll be able to quickly pick up your holds, grab and go bags, quick picks, and browse some new materials that we'll have in the lobby. We're very excited to welcome everyone back and see everyone's faces inside the library. So with that, I will pass it off to Kathy Speck, who will introduce our speaker.
We are so pleased to have Linda back. She joined us in 2018 to talk about the Civilian Conservation Corps in Iowa. And Linda researches and writes about Iowa history so that future generations of Iowans can learn about and enjoy our unique stories. She has traveled and spoken to hundreds of individuals and groups about the history and narratives of Iowa. Now, interestingly, her background actually is nursing, but she developed an avid interest in our local history, and she found she had a knack for doing research in genealogy and copy editing. She says her grandchildren were the catalyst for her writing. She found that our younger generation is interested in history if we make it interesting to them. She has 12 books that have been published and are available nationally, and we're very pleased to have her with us tonight. So, Linda, are you ready? Whoops, I can't hear Linda.
Yeah, we can't hear you, Linda, even though it says you're unmuted. Did
Can you hear?
you? Oh, yep.
Okay.
There we go.
Okay, super.
Great.
I'm still learning all this stuff, so excuse me. It's good to be with you all. I know we had a super time the last time I was there. And so I'm going to talk to you tonight about Prohibition. And again, my granddaughters brought this on. I said, they were in high school, and I said to them one day, "What do you know about Prohibition?" And they said, "Prohibition of what?" Well, I explained a little bit, and they had never heard about it. Well, then as I talked to more people, I realized there's a book that needs to be written for these people, for these kids. And so I was very interested as I began researching and trying to talk to somebody that had lived through it. Prohibition was from 1920 to 1933. And so I would tell every library, every place I spoke, "I'm writing about Prohibition. Do you have anybody I should talk to?" And virtually every library had somebody that I should talk to. And I would call them and we'd talk, and I usually got a little story out of them. Well, two men refused to talk to me. The first one was very polite. He just said, "There's family still alive, and I don't think I should talk about it." Well, I said to him, "You don't have to tell me names." And he still wouldn't talk about it. Well, unfortunately, he has died, and as far as I know, he never shared these memories. The second man I called, the first thing he said was, "Who told you to talk to me?" And I said, "Well, I was at your library, and they told me I should talk to you." "Well, who was it?" I said, "Two guys." "What makes you think I know anything about Prohibition?" I said, "Well, all I know is these guys told me I should talk to you." And the longer we talked, the more I realized how upset he was getting. And it went through my mind, this guy's going to have a heart attack, and I don't know where he's at. So I began trying to calm him down, express to him that it was all right. The last things he said to me was, "Erase this phone number, forget my name, and don't ever tell anybody you talk to me." Well, okay. It just seemed a little over the top to me. And so one of my sons-in-laws is a deputy sheriff. So the next time I saw him, I said, "Hey, I had this guy that said this. What do you think about that?" And he said, "Well, statute of limitations has run out on everything but murder." And little did I know, I said, "Well, give me a break. This is Iowa." Well, the more I researched, we did have murders. We did have gunfights. Now I say everything that happened in Chicago and New York, we had too. We just didn't make movies about it. So that's what got me started. Well, the next thing I ran into was people telling me how their fathers turned to making alcohol with the corn because it was worth so little. So again, I did some research. In 1919, at the end of World War I, corn was being sold for $5 a bushel. Farmers were being paid $5 a bushel for corn. Well, that inflates to like $75 a bushel now. So of course they were getting paid wonderful. Well, they bought tractors, they bought land, they built buildings. In 1923, they're being paid a quarter a bushel, and they can't pay these loans. So that's where a certain amount of them did turn to using their corn to make alcohol. Well, one day this same son-in-law gives me a call, and he said to me, "What do you know about the mail route?" I said, "I don't know anything about your mail route." Well, he was in the eastern part of the county talking to some people that were telling him they put money in their mailboxes on Saturday night, and on Sunday morning they had liquor. And supposedly they did not know who was selling it. Okay, so it just so happened I was going to this library in this area a few weeks later, so I was very excited I would get to get this some more information. Well, when I brought this up to my crowd, nobody had ever heard about it. And this is when it kind of clicked with me. Okay, these were farmers selling to their neighbors and everybody kept their mouth shut. Okay, so again, something more I had to learn. Well, the interesting thing was Iowa went dry in 1917. 3 years ahead of the nation, Iowa went dry. And a lot of that has to do with the WCTU, Women's Christian Temperance Union. And they had the idea that all the problems going on in their life, in the world, were caused by alcohol. So they were ready to get rid of alcohol. In 1916, Iowa had a vote. Iowa voted to go dry. We went dry in 1917. So, okay, the nation goes dry in 1920. It's a constitutional amendment that says it's illegal to manufacture, sell, or transport liquor. That's all the constitutional amendment says. Well, again, I'm thinking about this. Well, Congress had to make some laws to enforce this amendment. The first thing they had to decide was, where did something become illegal? Congress went with 0.5%. Anything more than 0.5% alcohol was illegal. So there went cough syrup, vanilla, stuff like that, all became illegal. And again, I was surprised to find out, even in 1919, 1920, Congress put loopholes in the law. And the first one had to do with, if you had a doctor's prescription for alcohol, you could buy good stuff, the strong stuff, at pharmacies, at a drugstore. So, okay, there's our first loophole. And actually, this was a place most people wanted to buy their alcohol because it came from factories. It was bonded, all this sort of stuff. But about 1925, the mob moved in and used the pharmacies to launder their moonshine, and it was no longer safe to buy it there. Well, again, as I'm researching, I was down at Tipton, southeast of Cedar Rapids, and the historian told me I needed to go to the quilt store in town, that had been a pharmacy during Prohibition. So I went there, and on the shelf were 3 bottles, still full of liquor, and saying for medicinal purposes only. And the people in the quilt store told me they had found these under the floor when they pulled up the floor to remodel. And then they told me they had also found a citation from the police where the pharmacist was charged with selling too much liquor one month, and his fine was $1,500 in 1920s. So again, this was a loophole, but eventually, the Federals did get around to checking it out and such. The second loophole was the Catholic and the Jewish wanted to have liquor with their services, alcohol. So they wrote this right in the law. The Catholics decided that only priests that were bishops or higher could purchase liquor. The Jewish said that any rabbi could purchase liquor, and my understanding is any man could say he was a rabbi and purchase liquor. Well, I was in Western Iowa and heard that this little town had one Jew in town, and he was so busy he had to hire help because he was the person to go to. So again, our loophole to the law. Well, like I said, I read a lot of old newspapers because, again, in this case, where do I get firsthand information? So one day I actually had to call my son-in-law, the cop, and I read this article to him. He asked me to make a copy of it, take it to the sheriff, and give it to him, which I did. Well, the interesting part about the article was, by 1928, when this article was written, any Illinois car was open to being stopped because it had an Illinois license plate. And so one of the deputies was down by Waterloo, saw this Illinois car, turned around, he was in his own car, began following it, and it went through Waterloo, it went through Cedar Falls, came up and went through Waverly. North of Waverly, Illinois car began shooting at the policeman in his private car. Well, the policeman had his wife with him, and he fired back, took out a tire, and the Illinois car went into a cornfield. Well, two men got out and started running. He got one of them, the other one completely got away. Well, eventually there were enough people around. A car did stop and pick up somebody, took him to Charles City, and turned him in to the police in Charles City because he was a deputy sheriff. So anyway, what made this article interesting was on a corner on 218 that is known as Whitney's Corner, a gunfight happened between a deputy sheriff and an Illinois mobster. My son-in-law is a Whitney, and they live a mile from this corner. So we know this corner. So of course, when my granddaughters heard about there being a gunfight on this corner, again, they could not believe it, you know, and talked about it to everybody. So I found my first murder in 1927, and it was a lady from Vinton, a lady. She was involved with the WCTU, and she had actually been going to the police around Vinton and saying to the police, "This man's a bootlegger, this man's a moonshiner, pick him up." She was writing a speech in her kitchen on a Sunday morning that she was going to give to the state convention, encouraging every member to begin going and reporting people to the police. Gunshot came through the window and killed her. This is still an unsolved murder in Iowa. The interesting thing is the Vinton and the Buchanan County Police, Benton County Police, figured out that there had been a mobster in town the week before she was killed. Malcolm Harbour had spent the week in town. They went to find him and couldn't find him. He was gone. Well, a few weeks later, I run into Malcolm Harbour again in Waterloo. And the police in Waterloo actually see him kill a man. They take off after him. Again, they lose him. He disappears. Well, I had begun thinking maybe Malcolm Harbour was going to play a part in the book because, you know, I research and I don't know how I'm going to put it out. So I really began looking for Malcolm Harbour. Well, a few weeks later, I find him up here in Waverly, and he actually has a gunfight with the police in Waverly. The police think they wound him, and he goes out what is known as the Horton Blacktop. Well, I about fell over because I grew up on the Horton Blacktop. And again, they lost him. And again, I'm just going, this can't be. You can't lose somebody on the Horton Blacktop. It's about as flat as Iowa can get. Well, they lost him. A few weeks later, they actually raid the Plainfield Motel. I graduated from Plainfield. I didn't know there was a motel in town. They raided the motel. They missed him by just a few hours. He went up through Minnesota and back to Chicago. But it came out after the feds raided the motel that this little town of 500 people in Bremer County was a mob hangout. The mayor, the council, the justice of the peace, the judge, all of these people knew the mob was using this motel to hide in. And so again, this little bitty town in the middle of Iowa was a mob hangout. Well, I did finish following up on Malcolm Harbour, and he did live through Prohibition. He continued to kill people. Sometime after Prohibition, he went to Cuba. I never could find out why he went there, and I lost him. I never found him again. So anyway, that was the first murder I found. And again, we had several. I mean, after the mob moved into Iowa, things changed. Before the mob was here, they really didn't enforce the law that much. And I found an article written by a Dubuque County sheriff, and he said right in it, we did not enforce the law until the Board of Supervisors told us we had to. And he said, then we would call all the moonshiners and bootleggers, tell them to come in to post $20 bond. And that supposedly meant they were coming back to stand trial. Well, this sheriff admitted he knew they weren't coming back. He figured they knew they weren't coming back, and he figured they went home and went right back to work. And in this article, he wrote, the reason we did not enforce the law until we had to was these were our neighbors. These were our friends. They might be my relatives. And that's really in our small towns and around how it was. You know, everybody pretty well knew a bootlegger or a moonshiner, knew how to get the stuff. And until the mob came in about 1925, it was very easygoing. Well, when the mob came in, things definitely changed. And the mob came to Iowa because we supposedly had this good alcohol. And they wanted it, and they wanted to sell it. In fact, a man from Tipton had to make a trip to Chicago at this time. And his son was telling me this. The man told all his friends he was going to get some of the good stuff in Chicago. Well, when the man went to his hotel, he asked somebody how he could get some good stuff. They told him to go out and stand on the corner and wait. Well, a person came up to him and said, are you looking for some liquor? And the man from Tipton said, yes, he was. The moonshiner opened his coat, and the man from Tipton said, I want the best stuff you had. The moonshiner said, it's right over here. It's from over there in Tipton, Iowa, where the guy came from. Well, he bought some because he was afraid not to. And when he went home, he told his friends he paid about double what he could have bought the same stuff for at home. So again, that's why the mob was buying Iowa liquor to take it home to Chicago and sell it at a profit. Well, unfortunately, the mob didn't care how anybody was treated and all of this sort of stuff, and it got dangerous. By the late 1920s, mothers were very concerned about prohibition. They were seeing their sons, teenage, younger sons, being asked to carry liquor for these moonshiners and bootleggers because supposedly the cops wouldn't stop them, wouldn't arrest them. And a nationwide group actually formed called Mothers Against Prohibition. And they really didn't do anything other than they let people know that prohibition wasn't working out and it wasn't the answer and that sort of thing. Because actually during Prohibition, more people drank than had drank liquor prior to that. And part of that was the excitement and then the speakeasies. Women never went to bars before the 1920s. Well, with the speakeasies, they had entertainment, they had dancing, it was fun. And more women wanted to go and do this stuff they were seeing in movies or hearing about, that sort of thing. So more people drank during Prohibition that hadn't drank alcohol prior to that. So, of course, FDR was elected in 1932, and one of his premises was to get rid of Prohibition, and that was one of the first things he did do. Well, so I finished the book with that, and I have a bunch of people that read my books, proof them, find things that I need to explain better or whatever. One of my cousins called me, and she said, can't you find something positive to say about Prohibition? I said, I'm going to have to think about that. So again, more research. Well, the first thing I found was that NASCAR racing truly comes from Prohibition, because especially down south, they would soup up their cars and then they'd race each other. And the first official NASCAR race was won by a guy driving the same car he had run the feds with. Well, she didn't really think that was necessarily something positive, so more research. Well, around my town, Shell Rock, north of Waterloo, when people hear what I'm working on, they might come and give me something or tell me something. Somebody came to my house one day and gave me a matchbook, a paper matchbook that said, "Stop at Shell Rock's Blind Pig." Well, I didn't know what a blind pig was, and of course I had to look it up. And this was another way of getting around prohibition. A person was not charged to drink. They were charged to come in and see the blind pig, which most cases was a stuffed animal. So they paid admission to see the blind pig, and they were given free a drink of alcohol. And so again, this was what they thought was a way of getting around the law. And eventually they would get raided and all this sort of thing. Well, so supposedly Shell Rock has this. And I'm trying to find it. I'm looking everywhere. Now, this part is not in the book because I did not find it till years later. But the house this was in is still standing, and it was down along the river. And in the late 1920s, the Methodist women actually went to this speakeasy and dumped all the liquor out and caused a big to-do, you know, all this sort of thing. Well, the interesting thing was the leader of the Methodist women was the wife to the bootlegger. So again, well, when I was trying to find this information, I actually ended up calling the Iowa State Alcohol Board historian. I didn't even know there was such a thing. Well, when I called her, I told her what I was looking for, and she told me there was literally nothing prior to 1933. There were no laws on the books. There was no inspection of taverns. There was no inspections of breweries. There was no licensing, none of this sort of thing. So to me, that's one of the positive things that came out of Prohibition, that things were licensed, were inspected, all of this sort of thing. The other thing I found was, one day I'm reading these old newspapers and I see John Doe and Jim Blow were arrested for moonshining. And I said to myself, those got to be aliases. Well, you know, at that time, nobody had a driver's license, so they could say their name was whatever. So after 1928, every alcohol-related arrest here in Iowa was fingerprinted. And with these guys that were claiming it was their first arrest, John Doe and Jim Blow, it was their fifth arrest. So again, so fingerprinting came out of Prohibition, and I truly think that's the most positive thing. So again, the worst thing to me is the mob, because prior to Prohibition, the mob truly had no power. Nobody was afraid of them, just maybe their little neighborhood, but they did not have statewide and nationwide coverage. And Prohibition allowed them to grow into it. So I'm going to share now a few things I found about the Ames area. These are all completely out of the Ames newspaper. And I really like these articles because you hear all the information. On February 16th of 1920, on the front page of the Ames paper, it said, "Moonshine is now sold to the thirsty folks of Ames. Mountain Dew has made its appearance in Ames." And that's, you know, Mountain Dew was one of these moonshine recipes. At the time, an Italian name, Carfigo Dominic of Des Moines, and it says Italian, was bonded out to the grand jury charged with illegal transportation of liquor. G.W. Keltner was charged with bootlegging, as well as Jason Allen. Mrs. Allen was charged as a common prostitute and bound over. The Allens were arrested at their place where they roomed on Sumner Avenue in Ames. The still was located at Dominique's house, and he had said he was paid $5 to bring 2 half-gallon jugs to Ames. Allen was given a fine of $100 and 5 months in jail. And like I said, in the beginning, a lot of these people aren't even named in the articles because they might be the well-known citizens in town are involved. So I didn't find anything else till September of 21. And in September of 1921, James Hickel was arrested for bootlegging and fined $500 in the spring of 21. Now he's been arrested again. In September of 21 also, and this is what it says, a Negro bootlegger squeals on his pails. The police found 9 barrels of mash at Fred Walker, colored, and he was arrested on Saturday and fined $100 for transporting liquor. The police discovered 40 pints in his back seat. When his pals did not pay his fine, he told the police chief all of his past. A private residence, and this is probably somebody well known, was raided in Des Moines and 9 barrels of mash was found. Fred Walker's whiskey had labels claiming it was bonded, but Walker said it was raisin whiskey. So again, there we go. In 22, a William McCracken of Ames was found guilty and fined $500 for bootlegging. In 1924, Raymond Harwick was fined $500 and had a 30-day jail sentence for bootlegging. He had 2 gallons of hooch in his possession. In 26, federal agents raided a private residence and confiscated a 10-gallon still, 3 quarts of moonshine, and 45 gallons of mash. The owner, A.E. Wolfkill, was arrested. And again, I wonder about the name. In 26, agents of Prohibition scoured the state for violators of the 18th Amendment. Already 3,000 gallons of alcohol are in their possessions after raids, and a dozen men are in custody. That's as far as that one went. 1927, Otto P. Klein, Klein, owner of a liquor plant, was arrested when 162 gallons of moonshine were found and his still was confiscated. In 1929, 2 members of the liquor squad found 38 gallons of moonshine hidden in a blackberry patch in a South Side residential district, and F.C. Cody was arrested. In 1930, 1,500 gallons of alcohol, home brew, hair tonic, moonshine whiskey, Mountain Dew, and Jake whiskey had been stored in the Story County Courthouse. The county sheriff and the county attorney had petitioned the court to allow it to be disposed of, and it said none will be offered for sale. So again, it's like everything. Everybody had it, and if you wanted to know about it, you knew about it. If you did not want to know about it, you did not know about it. I guess I'm ready for any questions that there are.
Does anyone have questions? If so, go ahead and put them in the Q&A box or in the chat.
Well, I have a message. Somebody says, sounds like pot today. Well, yeah, probably so.
I'm going to go ahead and share a PowerPoint here that shows some of your books, Linda.
Okay.
And that way everyone can see.
Here's my Prohibition book. Okay. I have another person said, why so many names and what were the differences? A lot of it had to do with what were the ingredients. Like the one article said it was raisin whiskey. Again, when it was made from the corn, it was usually considered moonshine. And I think you had to be into it to know what it was. Now, the big problem in Iowa was some of this alcohol was over 90 proof. And we did have people die from drinking this liquor because, number one, it was so strong, or it could have poisons in it. And Iowa was one of the few states that passed a law that said if you made liquor that killed someone, you could be tried for involuntary manslaughter. And at least 4 Iowa men served time in Fort Madison for that. And actually, one of the first times I actually spoke on Prohibition, I brought this up, and a man did say his uncle had been found guilty and spent time in Fort Madison for making alcohol that killed somebody. So I don't know specifically of different speakeasy locations in Ames. I just didn't get into it. I'm sure probably some of you can tell me or know about it, but yes, I drink and I like wine. ISU was involved, and it was mostly had to do with tailgate parties, that somebody would have a tailgate party, surprisingly, and it at times got raided. Well, there was an interesting one again. A person had a tailgate party at Ames, got arrested. For whatever reason, he was allowed to go home to Tipton to settle his affairs. And when he left Tipton, his car was found empty and he was never found again. So again, you want to know the rest of the story, you know. I skipped over Catherine's question about Templeton Rye. Templeton Rye is a very interesting story on its own. And if you're really interested in reading a good book about this, it's called Gentleman Bootlegger. And the person that wrote it actually was able to talk to the family in Templeton and get the information. But yeah, Templeton Rye took over or became popular because one man in the Templeton area had a recipe that he thought was wonderful. So he would go to all these farmers that were looking for ways to make money. And he would say to them, if you follow my recipe, if you get caught, I will support your family while you're in jail if you don't turn me in. And he had 3 or 4 men that did spend time in jail, did not turn him in, and he supported their families. So the big thing is Templeton Rye has a wonderful PR campaign because I've talked to, there's an Al Capone museum in North Chicago. And I called, we expected to write a book about, or I expected to write a book about the western part of the state. And when I went out there to talk to people, all they could talk about was Templeton Rye. Well, okay, but I want these other stories from the area. And Templeton Rye, they only sent the liquor to Kansas City, Des Moines, and Omaha. So again, I'm not sure how Al Capone, if he ever got a hold of Templeton Rye. Now, the claim that it was his favorite liquor and was sent to him in prison is completely PR. There's nothing behind it. So the people selling Templeton Rye have a lot of good PR, but what operated during Prohibition, and then it was over, you know. So, and again, everybody in Templeton, the priest, the mayor, all these people knew what was going on, but it was helping the community, it was helping the farmers. So they kept it quiet. I don't know which mob was in the Ames area, and so much of it, probably to some extent, it could have been Al Capone because he operated in the eastern part of the state. And why I say that is there's another book out. It's about Al Capone's brother, and it's something like Two Gun something. Sorry, I can't say the rest of it. Your librarian, I'm sure, can come up with it, or send me an email and I'll tell you. But anyway, Al Capone's brother ran away from home when Al Capone was just a kid. They lived out on Long Island. So the brother wanted to be a cowboy, and he ended up in Nebraska being a policeman, a law enforcement. Well, Prohibition came, the brother became a federal officer, and he began seeing in the newspaper about an Al Capone in Chicago. And supposedly he said to himself, I wonder if that's little Al. Al Capone was called Little Al within the family because the father was Al also. So somehow the brother and Al Capone were able to connect. They met up in northern Wisconsin, and it was a family reunion. The mother went, some sisters, all this sort of thing. Well, Al Capone and the brother made an agreement. Al Capone would not go west of Des Moines, and the brother would not come into Iowa. And that's how they operated and did not interfere with each other. So I don't have an education in history or any of that sort of stuff. I love Iowa history. And when I began telling it to these grandkids, I realized there were stories here that we need to preserve. And that's how I feel about all my stories. I want to talk to the people. I want to preserve their words. I really want our kids and grandkids to know these stories. And like I said, my grandkids are just so excited about it. And the time I spoke about Prohibition in Waverly, they brought their friends. And when we finished, I had 15 teenage girls jumping up and down around me and going, why didn't we learn this in school? Well, so this is really my retirement, and I'm enjoying it because my grandkids are involved. My newest book, hopefully will be out this year. It's about Rosie the Riveters in Iowa. My second granddaughter did the cover for it. She's now in college. She's a computer graphics major. She did the cover. My oldest granddaughter is now a teacher on her own, and she wrote the author's info in the last several books. And so these two oldest ones have gotten very involved in it, and I'm hoping they may be that interested that they can take over when I can't. So, I'm trying to read questions, so I'm reading Lisa's question about a young man in rural Ashen. That's an interesting, I have not heard that story, and I believe it, but I don't know anything about it. Capone's whiskey, yeah. And again, so much of it, as far as with Capone, there's probably no, as far as I could find, as far as the Al Capone Museum knows, he had no connection to the story at Templeton Rye. It was all these farmers, and they were doing it on their own to support their families. So I don't know about arrests in Iowa as compared to other states. It's just not something I've gotten into to look for, so sorry about that. I don't know if other states had prohibition laws prior to 1920. It's a good question. It's just something I never looked into after I got started on researching prohibition. How much time I spend on research? The Prohibition book actually took me 3 years because in the beginning I couldn't find people to talk to, so I went to the newspaper and then I began finding people to talk to. And a lot of it had to do that my publisher wanted to publish it and they wanted it out, and we finished. And again, I try to tell people, if you've got a story, you need to write it down. And if you buy one of my books, write it down in the book so your family's got it. And actually, my grandfather's moonshine recipe is in the book. And I was one of the younger cousins, and I always knew my aunts and uncles quit talking about something when we came around. And so when I began writing my book, this Prohibition book, my dad gave me his father's Prohibition or moonshine recipe, and it's in the book. And I'm expecting one day to hear my granddaughters tried it. So most of my books take a year to 2 years, but again, it's just what I ran into with Prohibition. Now, the book I'm working on right now is about polio. And again, some of you people will know what polio is. When I asked my granddaughters what they knew about polio, they didn't know what it was. So I explained it. I said, I know you had polio vaccines. And it was, why? Why did we have to have it? You know, that sort of thing. Well, again, I've run into so many people with stories to tell. And even as a nurse, I've run into, I didn't know anything about the rocking bed, which maybe some of you know about. I knew the iron lung. I did not know the rocking bed. And that's the book I'm working on now. And I have the feeling I'm going to be asking my publisher if it can go long, because my publisher wants my books around 50,000 words, and most of them are right in there. But we have at times, she's let me go a little longer or something, so we'll see. Any area of the state more relaxed, and prior to 1920, when it went nationwide, definitely along the Mississippi. Of course, it's a lot of Germans. And there was also the idea, even during Prohibition, people thought the islands in the Mississippi, there was no law concerning them, so they could make liquor out on them and they weren't breaking the law, which again, you know, people soon found out they weren't. I do think, you know, there's going to be areas where it went on and it wasn't spoke about, and the feds didn't get involved because they had enough to do with our big cities. Des Moines actually was known as Little Chicago at one time because there was so much activity in the area. And so I think that's a lot of it, is how much they called attention to themselves and got the feds involved. As far as repeating history, well, I think like we said with marijuana and the drugs, yeah, a lot of this stuff is just going to go on, you know, and it's just the way it is. Now, no distilleries or brewery remained open in Iowa. They were all closed. And a lot of them turned to making medicinal, and again, I can't say it right now, sorry, but most of the breweries that were able to stay in business making other things then reopened following Prohibition. But some were not able to stay in business, so they did close. So, anything else? If you're interested, I have a Facebook page. It's called Lost History in Iowa, I believe. It's something similar to that. And if you can contact me through there, we can work out you getting books directly from me if you want. Yeah, there you go. And there's my email address too, losttownsofiowa@gmail.com. Oh, someone worked in a building in Des Moines that was supposed to have housed a still during Prohibition. And when it was damp, there was still a smell that they said was the mash. And I can believe it, yeah. And in fact, here a couple years ago, and maybe Cassie remembers it, we got a notice from the State Museum Board, State Museum people, that as barns and other areas in the state were taken down, we needed to make sure there were not tunnels or some of this sort of stuff hidden, because they were finding unknown rooms, tunnels, that sort of thing. And I do know down in Cedar Falls, there's a barn that they found a tunnel leading, I don't know where it led to, but it was a tunnel in a room they didn't know was there. Now, most of the towns, and this is Shell Rock, that were along rivers, they would use the river to transport stuff. And as far as I know, the police did not get involved with that because they just didn't have the ability to. But again, this was something that they could do and hopefully stay hidden and that sort of thing. So the biggest thing I tell everybody is talk to your older relatives, because you're probably going to hear something. And I love those old stories. This man says he heard hard cider was much more popular before Prohibition, but beer became popular during and after. And again, I think it had to do with what they could find and what they could get, you know, because in my area, we had roller rinks and that sort of thing, dance halls. And that was one of the areas that the police did watch, were the dance halls, the roller rink, that sort of thing. Well, evidently there were always people there ready to sell liquor, and you would be told to go to the 4th fence post or the 2nd driveway or something like that. And I always had it in my mind, why somebody didn't find it and take it? Well, one day I'm talking about that and a guy begins laughing. And I said, do you want to share what you're laughing about? And he said, I was one of those little kids that ran around and emptied out all the jugs. And I said, wow, you could have been killed, you know. But so it did happen. I just hadn't run into it, that the little kids around were out looking for the moonshine and not dumping it out. So you can imagine what that would have created. So.
All right. Do we have any other questions for Linda? I am not seeing any more coming in, but I did want to remind everybody that our exhibit, Uncorked, The Spirited History of Alcohol in Ames, is still on display right now. The museum, because of COVID-19, is only open by appointment, but you can make an appointment on our website, and we're happy to let in individuals or small groups to see the exhibit. So now that everybody's interest is piqued in Prohibition, make sure that you come in and see that. Thank you so much, Linda. This was really, really interesting. And I think a lot of us are looking to purchase your book or check it out from the library and learn a little more.
Well, thank you for having me, and everybody stay well, please.
Thank you, everybody, for coming.
Thanks. Thank you. Thank you, everybody.